Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. We give it a few more seconds before we actually start, but everyone in the webinar, just a few seconds to allow people to join, and then we'll get started. If you have any questions in the meantime, use the chat icon in the panel to your right to ask me any questions, and I will answer them at the end. So let's get started. Welcome everyone on this Build from Scratch webinar. Let's go over the content. So a basic agenda for today is the welcoming and some general remarks that I will make. An introduction on our new organization Planadigm, who we are, what we do, and then an intro on Pigment, the organization itself, what they're doing, where they're from, stuff like that. Then, of course, I think for most of you, the most important part of this demo, a demo using Pigment. So we're going to build from scratch, based on a couple of CSV files, a P&L in such a short time as in 15 minutes, might be 20, but depending on how fast I speak here. And at the end, we have a Q&A, and in between, I also have 2 polls, which I would like to ask you. There will be an interaction by from your side to provide me some input based on the question that I will ask. And we have definitely a hard stop at 2 o'clock. So in that case, we will be ready, so you can move on to the stuff that you would like to do. So welcome everybody to this webinar. Like I mentioned before, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A panel. If there's quite a number of questions raised during this webinar which cannot be answered, I will make sure that I will share that with anyone who is in this meeting, in this webinar. So if that could be held due to time that we cannot cover all the questions, but if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we'll answer them afterwards if need be. Short introduction from my side. My name is Jan Veerman. I worked for BSO, which became Origin, which became Atos Origin, for over 6 years. Afterwards, I moved to Cognos as a planning consultant, which was taken over by IBM. I also worked there for over 6 years. And after IBM, I decided to move on to another organization called ION, a boutique consulting firm in supply chain area. And I worked there for over 10 years, almost 11. And recently I decided to move, and with a partner, decided to set up a Planadigm. And like I said, it's recently established, but we have quite a lot of planning experience in this area, and we're a fast-growing organization. So first employees have been signed, and more on the way. So it seems we're hitting a right spot in the market to that's appealing for planning consultants in, that could be, like I said here, process improvement. So we know something about planning processes within different industries, and we can do an analysis and see where we can improve, but also in the implementation of planning software. And for that, we decided only to focus on Pigment. And Pigment is the tool of choice for us, because we think Pigment is Planning 3.0. And what do I mean by Planning 3.0? In the old days, So from 1980 onwards, so to say, that was around that time I started to work in 1995. I entered the market, but it seems that back then we had the legacy planning systems in place, the Cognos planning, Hyperion planning, the SAP environments were there. And if we started to implement it from a process perspective, it would be really top down. Management would say, this is the figure you need to achieve it. And the implementation was a waterfall. As a planning consultant, you would go in a development environment and you would be there for a couple of months. And then you would come out and say, okay, this is what we've implemented, and show it to the users. Somewhere at the beginning of the 2000s, 2010, a new area. It's not that strict, but we did see that, for example, on the tooling side, the first entrance of cloud-based planning tools came along. So, for example, Anaplan came around 2011 on market. And from a process perspective, we did see it was now much more in the business, a top-down target setting and a bottom-up adjustments. So and in between the handshakes, and it could be an iterative process for a couple of ways before it was finalized, but it was really an iterative process, and the implementation started to be something in between a waterfall and what we use nowadays is a Scrum approach. But still an old school sort of implementation. And now, starting as 2023, we do see that the next level of technology is joining. So AI is making a part of chatbots, for example. It will be introduced in planning tools later on as well, I'm sure. But we do see, for example, that Pigment. Pigment is definitely a tool where, for example, Anaplan is the first tool. We think Pigment, based on the technology they use, clever things that they implemented, it's much more a new technology which really helps speed up the implementation, but also the maintenance of it. From a process perspective, if you look at planning processes, in my opinion, it should be more decentralized. You do not see it everywhere, but give the planner the power to do it within the boundaries he has to adjust the plan accordingly. As long as he stays within those boundaries, it's fine. But as long as he's crossing that boundary, he needs to get the approval from above. And we really want to go to Scrum and Agile approach, quick iterations of 2 weeks, for example, and develop, show the new development, and then move on to the next sprint and the use cases of that. So we think by that we're entering a new area where Planning 3.0 is the way to move forward. Looking then at Pigment, Pigment we see, for example, is just recently started by 2019, so only 3 to 4 years ago, by Romain Nicoli and Eleonore Crespo. Romain and Eleonore are French-based, so their headquarters also based in Paris, and they both have a background in planning. And for example, as I understood it correctly, Pigment was created based on the fact that they were not too happy with the current tooling, and they decided, come on, this can be done differently. So they started to create the Pigment platform. It is a fast-growing organization, so as you can see, they have several investment rounds, a Series A, a Series B, and by September last year, the last round of investment was done, and they gained 65 million addition in investment, mainly to be used to expand to the US. So started in Europe, expanded in Europe, and now moving on to other regional sections in the world. In this case, the US. It's a cloud-based planning tool, so you only need a browser and a working network connection, internet connection, and it supplies, there are use cases for different areas, so finance, HR, sales and marketing, as well as supply chain. So you can, in that case, compare it to the use cases of, for example, a tool like Anaplan. Anything that you can imagine can be modeled. The great thing about it is that you can start small. The first use case that you want, for example, on the finance side, and then you can move along to the demand planning, and then you can move along to the supply planning. And based on the fact it's all in one cloud-based platform, you can start to connect it. So the output of your demand planning can be used as input for your supply plan, and both feeding up your financial plan. Looking at the customers, over 100 plus already worldwide, still growing. Also, you see that the number of large customers is increasing. I'm currently in Amsterdam at a huge customer, a large customer where we implement a supply chain solution. Employees 170 plus, but probably that number has already changed. So yeah, growing fast. They have the right kind of investors. I think also one of the Anaplan investors had one of the Anaplan founders stepped out, created an investment fund based on the millions of dollars he received, and now also is one of the backers of Pigment. So that also gives you an idea of the potential of this platform. What I want to do is do a quick poll. So I will ask you to look at the screen and give me some feedback on the question, do you know Pigment? And we do see that the interactions pay off in indeed such a way that, yeah, we do see that people are interacting. Yep, I will close it. So that's a good sign. No one heard of Pigment before, but that's a good sign that it leaves us a complete new market where we can start to see what's in there. So that was the first poll. Later on, we'll have a second one. But first, setting the scene, because we now slowly move into the demo, and to give you an idea, what we are doing here is we try to model this organization is selling two types of drones, and we just made it quite easy. So two types of products, only in 3 markets. We have only for 3 months of actuals data, and the rest we are going to forecast. The actual data that we have is units sold, a cost price, and the sales price. Based on that, we're going to load data. We're going to generate the dimensions, which is called lists in Pigment. And once that's done, we can create a table, which is called a module, for example, in Anaplan. And once we have that, we can create a dashboard, and we can do all kinds of nice stuff with that. Then we are going to add a forecasting functionality to it. So based on 3 months of forecast of actual data, we're going to create a forecast, and we're going to toggle on scenario functionality and do some nice stuff there. And we try to do that in 50 minutes. Might be a little bit more, but bear with me that I'll try to do it as fast as possible. So this is the demo. For that, I need to switch to another browser. So I will close this one off, and we'll move to another window. And in here, you do see my Safari browser. Any browser will do, as long as it's up to date. And I'm logged in, as you can see here. So this is my information. I'm in Planadigm. Planadigm is the name of my company, of course. But in here, what we can do is start to create a new application. So we'll start with the button New Application, and we call this one Build from Scratch. And add a description if you want to, and we're going to create it. And once it's created, it will open us by default. And in here, it works with boards, and Pigment works with blocks. And as we can see, there is now only 2 types of blocks, a role and a user role. If I, for example, open this, it will state that I am an admin for this one, which is fine for now, but you can add, for example, additional users here and give them specific rights. So it could be a reader, a contributor, designer, modeler, of an admin. first things that we want to do is based on the settings. We want to create the calendar. So the calendar we can create based on Gregorian or based on week. Starting month of the fiscal year, it should be your fiscal year. In this case, it's January. It will be a week, a month dimensionality, could also be day. And I have to supply the data which I want to aggregate as well, because if I do the aggregation already, Pigment starts to build that those blocks for me. Other option which I need to toggle on is the enable differentiating between your data between actual and forecast. So I want to use a switchover date, and from that switchover date it is forecast. Before that switchover date it's an actual. So I grade it, and in the background it starts creating the dimensions. And if I go back to the blocks, you can see now there is also a calendar folder where a couple of items are now added. So quarter, month. So if I, for example, look at month, you can see my start and my end date. I can see the quarter it is applying to, the year it's applying to, and also an actual type, for example. So if I now open my switchover date, so it's now all actuals, as you can see. If I open my switchover date and I want to do a switchover from the 1st of April, in this case I need to provide the months first. It's based on the American setting. If I go back to month, it will see, okay, before that switchover date it is an actual, so these 3 months, and the rest is a forecast. As you can see here, it's based on a formula. We will create some formula, so never mind. That's something that we will do later on. So based on a couple of settings, we created a calendar for us. What we want to do now is create a transaction list. And this one is sales data. So we're going to create sales, and we do not specify a folder, and we want to load it in from a sales file. I have that file available. I just drag it in, and there's a sales CSV. We're going to set up the import, and there are always 2 steps for the import. First is the settings of the file itself. Once that's correct, we can move to the mapping of the dimensionality. So first step, we're going to say it sees it's a Unicode. The column separator is a semicolon, and that's fine because I do see there are 4 columns here. My header is in row 1, so my data starts at row 2, and I can, for example, add a load date. It will add a constant, and I can add your pairs. You can see later what that does. You can also add an additional constant value. So if you want to have a column where every cell is has the same value, you can add it here as well. We'll leave that for the time being. Once the first setting is done, I can start to load in that data. So it does see that there are 5 columns, and in the properties I can start to select it. I can do it manually. It keeps on the order of the columns here. I can also add all missing sources and can then start to create it. So country is, we want to make that a dimension, and we need to create it because we do not have it there. So if I click on create, it's now created. For month, it is also a dimension, and in this case it's already an existing one because the calendar settings created a month dimension for us. For product, it is also a dimension. It's also not there yet, so we need to create it, and that's also fine. For units sold, it is a number, and for the load date, that's just a date. What I want to do is on the date format, I want to change it to Great Britain because I know that's the correct setting for this date. I want to switch on the second option. Based on that option, what it does is based on the newly to be created dimension, it also wants to, it will start to populate it with the unique values. And there is another option that we would like to do is we want to, if you want to reload this file on a frequent base and delete the old data and load in the new data, you want to toggle these options. So for the time being, this is fine. I import it, and it gives an overview. So there are new items, so 18 records to be imported. It added 3 unique items to country. It added 2 unique items to product. So this is the, I have to go to the no folder, because there we see, for example, the sales file. So the 18 records in here, you can see that below. And we have a country mapping, a month mapping, and a product mapping. And Pigment works as follows. Any colored cell in here is based on dimensionality. And you can see here, those are just a numeric date and a load date. So country, for example, is now created. It was not there. It's now created based on the import. So this was just a simple creation of sales. What we also want to do is create cost data, so the pricing data. So if we call this one, for example, prices, also start from import, and I select the prices file, do the same exercise again. And in here, the mapping we've seen, so I will leave that, enrich the data with the load date. I'll maybe want to add that as well. Select Europe Paris, go to the next step. And do a mapping here as well. The nice thing about this one is that I will change this one to GB. So country is a created dimension country, which we created in the previous step. Product is also a dimension created in the previous step. Sales price is a number. Cost price is also a number, and the load date is again a date. I will change the date volume is in the GB. If there are new items in my country or product dimension, I want to have them added to the list. So I will toggle this option, and I can indeed delete existing items if that's the case, but this is a first import, so this seems to be okay. And I import it. And also here it will state me, okay, I added 3 records for prices, but no additional unique items created for or country or product. So prices is in here as well, sales price, cost price. So we loaded in some basic data. So what we can do now is we have our lists created. We have our transaction tables. Now we can start to create, for example, a new metric, and we call that units sold. Units sold, and that is based on that's a number, and that's based on 3 dimensions: country, month, and product. As you can recall, we loaded in the sales cycle of the sales data, which was in country, month, and product. So I need to define the dimensionality in here, and then I can create it. And I need to start to populate it based on the data from sales. So what I can do is type in the formula sales, and I want to collect the units sold. So if I collect that one, so target is, it's first the object, the block, and then it's the specific item in here, so units sold. If I press enter, you will see that it will generate a number which is equal to all. So I need to specify how the aggregation is done. So that's done by a by clause, and I need to refer to country, month, and product. If I press enter again, it now sees, I need to aggregate that units sold based on country, month, and product. And then it starts to populate the items here in the correct order. We only had for 3 months history, so that's actually quite good. So this is fine. And of course, you can select already, start in a metric. You can start to select, for example, a specific product and slice and dice your data. We'll come to that later on as well. The next topic that we want to create, or next metric, is, for example, cost price. And cost price is based on the prices that we loaded, and cost price is based on only two items, country and product. There was no month dimension in that, because we for now see that the pricing is based on only on country and product, and it's not changed by the months for now. So if we create that one, we create another item here, and we can now start to type the data, and we loaded it into prices. So prices, in this case, it's cost price. Again, here we need to specify the aggregation formula. And if you type by and do not specify it, you could do by average, AVG, then it's taking the average. By, if you only specify by, it is by default sum. In this case, we need to collect prices dot country and prices prices dot product. It's there. What we can do now is use the pivot icon here on top and start to repivot. So I can drag in my products in here and pull the metric on top. And I can save this view as a default. And now I have my countries and my products in here, and this is cost price. What I can do now is create a duplicate. So double click on the three dots in here, create a duplicate, and I call this, for example, a sales price. And I want to copy the view, and I want to copy the formula, and I will duplicate. And in this case, it is now the sales price. So we should not reference it to cost price, but to sales price. So I type in SA, it sees its sales price. And now if I enter it, it's created there. So the duplication of metrics and then quickly adjust the formula gives you already quite a nice overview. What we want to create now is another metric called revenue. And revenue is something which we want to see by product, by month, and by country. Product, country, and country, month, and product. So those three dimensions also in a no folder. And in this case, I want to have a revenue based on the units sold. Unit sold. So I click in unit sold times the sales price. And that's the metric sales price that we want to use. And then we start to create it, and Pigment knows based on the dimensionality how to apply that one. Cost of goods sold is also something that we want to do. So in this case, we can duplicate the revenue again, and then call it cost of goods sold. We want to duplicate the view, and we want to duplicate the formula. So we only have to adjust the formula slightly, and then instead of sales price, you can imagine that it's now based on cost price. And we also now have cost of goods sold. So quite easy to create an overview. And what we can do now is create a new table, and we bring those metrics together. So we call this, for example, P&L. And you have to select the cost of goods sold and, for example, the revenue. Those we want to bring in. We click on it, and now we have cost of goods sold and revenue. I want to reorient this because I want to have revenue on top. I use the pivot, and I drag my revenue on the right side to the top. Save the view, and now revenue is on top. What I can do from here is also create a metric. So we did see that creating on the plus sign, we can create a metric or another block. But in this case, if we do it from the pivot environment and create a new metric, which we call, for example, margin, and we can create it, what it automatically does, it will look at the dimensionality of the table here, and it will add, based on the other metrics, it will use that dimensionality also in here. So we can create it, and margin in this case, if we select it, we can, it is revenue minus cost of goods sold. So very quickly, we're starting to create a simple P&L. What we can also do is duplicate the margin. So by clicking on the triangle here, we can add this metric again. It's duplicated in this view, and we can double click the icon here as well, and then show value as percentage of a metric, and then we can select the metric and say revenue, and then we can do an apply, and then we have a metric. So for example, on margin, we want to format this cell. So instead of 2 decimal points, we want to make it 1. And that's basically it, that we've created now also a margin icon in here. Another one to maybe add in here is another item called forecast. Oh, I need to forecast. And then we can slowly move into the dashboarding. So we create this one based on the 3 dimensions. That is fine. And if we click it, click this one, and I can use a formula. So we just do a simple forecast one. And what do we want to forecast in this one? We want to do a forecast based on revenue. And that we want to do it over the months. So in this case, if we press enter, it's starting to create a forecast. And as you can see, based on the switch over date that we set in the beginning, if there's an actual, it will take the actual. If there's not an actual, it will start to create a linear forecast based on the preceding months. So very quickly, we created a table, and we did some reordering, created additional metrics and stuff like that. And now what we can do is start to push this one, for example, to a overview. So we have this overview, which we want to start to use we save this one first as the default, and we want to push it to a board, BNL dashboard. Boards are the main items which will be used by end users. So we just create it. So it's not there yet. We do not. We select a no folder, create and configure. So that's one added. We also want to make sure that this data is there in a graphical form. So we select the chart. And what we can do based on the format of this one, we can start to play around with that. So I want to have, for example, a combined chart. So the stacked bars, or the bars including a line. And I want to have all my normal data fields as a bar item, and my margin percentage, I needed to change the name, as a line. And I then also need to check a secondary axis there. And now you can see here it is 41%, 42%. It's based on the right axis there. And I can save this view, save as a different view. So PNL graph, for example. So we can always reuse this view, and then I push it also to the same dashboard. I use the PNL one, and now I can go to the board itself. I can start to rearrange it a little bit, make it a little bit bigger, so you have a better overview. So it's now there. So we have an overview on in a bar chart, as well as the table. And if I save it, we can do a slice and dice of the data, show me only the UK and for a specific product. And you see that as well as the bar below, as well as the chart, it's showing the same data because it's based on the selections we made on top. So we created quite quickly also now a dashboard based on that. We're nearing the end of this application, but I mentioned that we also wanted to have some scenarios in here. So that's not in. So what we want to do is allow the option for scenarios to be added. So in this case, we just select scenarios in the left corner, and we say get started, and we activate it. And out of the box, we get 3 scenarios, so baseline, best case, and worst case, where best case is a child of baseline, and worst case is also a child of baseline. Later on, we can create additional scenarios based on baseline, or even based on one of the existing children of baseline. So best case, that can also be done. So it's now available, and we can show that, for example, if we take, for example, a sales one here, it should be available there in the let's go to the P&L board on top, where we have the scenarios enabled. As you can see here, we have baseline. We can select another one. You can select more than one, but now we are looking at best case. It's also in the view, and it's there. What we can do in, for example, sales, we have an overview here where we can add the metric. Let's call it the. That's the sales price, for example, where you would see here that it's now also has the 3 scenarios. And if I click down, I can see them. I can, for example, create a formula based on the baseline formula, but create a different one. So in this case, if I click the plus button, and for the simplicity of this one, I multiply the base case by 1.2, unsync this one, and we can do the same for worst case. Click on the new formula and multiply this by 0.75, for example. So then also unsync this one, and if I now go back to my P&L dashboard and have, for example, a best case and a worst case scenario in here, you can see that there is indeed a best case in the table below and a baseline, and the best case is indeed a higher number on sales, but you can see that my margin is also increasing based on the calculations that are in there. So we added scenarios, we created different formulas, and scenarios could also be based on any other input. So if you create a P times Q, what we say, a metric-based application, you can do different kind of stuff. So instead of now doing a multiplication by 1.2, you can also start to play with the parameters, the different parameter settings in your application. So we've created scenarios, and that is basically it what I wanted to show. Maybe good to show some other nice tricks in here. So for example, if we click on revenue, we can do a dependency diagram on top. If we click on it, it will say, okay, revenue is made out of units sold times sales price. And if we click here on revenue, it indeed says it's unit sales price by of units sold by sales price, but revenue is also used, for example, in margin and in the forecast one. So Pigment makes sure that you always can do your data lineage. It traces back. Maybe one other cool item which I really like is based on the forecast. It's now a calculated item. It might be that we want to override it. So for example, if I want to allow users to override a formula, I can go to the settings of this specific metric, and in the structure I can toggle on this override option, the first one. So if I click on update, and if I go now to my dashboard, and for example, the first option here in baseline was, you always need to do it on the lowest level of granularity, but there's now 60 million. If I want to make it 10 million, I can just update it. The graph is immediately updated, as you can see here. So it's overwriting the formula. I can go back by just escaping, backspace, and it will show you in a second the formula again, or the calculated item based on the formula. See, the 60 million is back. last topic here, what we've done here is we created all the blocks, as Pigment calls it. So transactional data, metrics, dimensional data, and even a table into one overview. What you could do, for example, on top level, create, for example, a new folder and call it, for example, metrics, just as an example. And then you can, if you click it open and we leave the calendar closed, what we can do, for example, is drag and drop this to the metrics. And as you can see, I just did one, but you can do it all when you have them all grouped together in one environment. You can do this by metric, you can do this by function area. It's completely up to you how you want to do it. So that leaves us at the end. I think it was not exactly 15 minutes, a little bit more, but maybe a good recap of what we've done. We've loaded in transactional data based on CSV files. From that, we were able to create the dimensionality. So, for example, a country was based on the dimensionality and automatically created by Pigment. Pigment can do different types. You can create it by the import file. You can also create several CSV files where the dimensionality is put in based on unique numbers and names, for example. But you can also do it manually. Different ways how to set that up. We started once we created transaction tables and the dimensionality, we created the metrics based on that. So the sales price, the units sold, for example, we created those metrics based on specific formulas where we did the by to do the grouping. Then we started to create a table where we combined a specific set of metrics into one overview, created additional, you could recall the margin percentage one calculation based on just replicating that margin one and then make it a percentage one. We did some slicing and dicing. We did some formatting of data. We created then the board at the end for an end user, where the user is capable of slicing and dicing the data. We created the scenarios, and we created the ability to override forecast data with just a few clicks. And yeah, it was not exactly 15 minutes, but in a really, really short time, we created this one. So I'll stop sharing and go back to the presentation. So we left off here. Good to see you're all still there. You're still following, that's a good sign. So when you start to implement tools like Pigment, what we believe is, I'm currently at a customer where the business case is based on Excel. They're using Excel quite a lot to do all kinds of planning, but they wanted to move a more robust and stable platform. And we do now already see that implementing it in a stable platform, robust platform as Pigment, we already have the discussion on how to align the planning process. And we already started to implement a couple of improvements there. For supply chain companies, it might be a good exercise to, instead of the Excel environment, start to do it in Pigment, because you're much, much quicker in setting it up, but also in your actual day-to-day planning. So it could lead to reduced inventories where it is where you have too many. It could also lead into increased sales. So that's an increase in revenue. Reduced sales, reduced inventories is, of course, a cost component. So besides inventories, you could also look at other cost components that can be reduced. And instead of planning based on what happens to you, you can start to be more proactive. The use of scenarios, you did see it was quite easy to do, but just a few clicks we had created a scenario. You can be much, much more proactive in how you want to approach this. Create a new scenario, see what it does. Is that the outcome that you want? Switch to that version instead of the old one. And as you can see, once you've set it up correctly, it's much more easy to maintain. It's automated, and in the end, it's less effort than, for example, an Excel environment. I want to ask you another question. So there will be another poll out there. And the question here is, if you were to replace your current planning tool, would Pigment be an option after what you have seen today? And I will start the interaction here. 3 options. Yes, it is. Maybe, not convinced. Or no, we're happy with the tool that we currently have. And I'll leave it open for a few more seconds for people to enter their choice. I'm happy with this one. So yes, Pigment is an option. Excellent. So that one is good to hear. So it's quite a convincing platform, I guess. And then we have some Q&A. Right on time, I think. So let's see if there are any questions in the Q&A. So there's one question on the loading of data. So what we did see, the question is, can the import files, can that be automated, that load? Yes, you can. In this case, we loaded the CSV file. So we can, of course, schedule based on a file share, for example, that you have. If the files are there, we can just pick it up by scheduler and then load it in on a frequent base. Maybe good to know is that another option would be to have a direct connection to your source system. So instead of your source system spitting out a CSV file, Pigment is really keen on having a direct connection to your source file, if that is allowed, of course, by your IT or your functional application guy or girl who is maintaining that application. If he or she allows it, then we would definitely do it. Pigment has out of the box a couple of connectors already available. I like the fact that Pigment is in the phase of attracting more customers, so they're very keen on developing additional direct connectors if need be. I think SAP is on the development side, so they're going to implement that one in the next couple of weeks. So that is also something to watch out for. If that's not available, available yet, we can request it and then see if we can push it up higher in the in order. But if it's not there, CSV will do for the time being. And that's the only question I have so far. Any other questions also from the other people? If you are, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And I'll wait a couple of seconds. If no other questions do come in, then we're right on time, just before 2 o'clock. Give you some time back. Good to know. Move to the last slide, is that if you have any questions after this webinar, please shout out. My credentials are there, my phone number, my email address. You can also find us at planadigm.com, the website. My information is there as well. So please reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns. If you want to have more information, for example, please shout out. We're available to support you. This webinar will be recorded is recorded and will be shared afterwards. So you will receive a link in a couple of days where you can rewatch this one. We will also share this one or on our platform website later on as well. We'll quickly check in the chat panel. No other questions came in. So by that, I want to thank you all for attending. Have a great day. And you know where to reach me. Goodbye.